I think that it's so important for us to really learn to be noticers of those things in our lives. And I encourage people to think about the unexpected things. I was driving to work this morning and there was the most beautiful sunrise.
Mm.
I was sitting at my office and there was a hummingbird outside the window. My son was outside playing and brought in a flower for me. Those little things that so often we're tempted to overlook that make all the difference in shifting our perspective. And I think that when we can learn to not allow ourselves to be bombarded by all the negative things that are surrounding us all the time, and instead train our minds to think on whatever is good, whatever is noble, whatever is praiseworthy, whatever is true, whatever is lovely, then it can really, really shift our perspective and our attitudes in our lives.
You're listening to the Big Ideas Podcast with Ashlee Ilg. Tune in for honest conversations as we pursue bold dreams, redefine what is possible, and empower the next generation to live big. You'll hear stories that prove over and over again that just because something wasn't a part of our plan doesn't mean it won't be used for our good. Whether you're already an entrepreneur, you dream of becoming one, or you're raising the next generation of entrepreneurs, this podcast is for you. There's no time to waste on your big ideas. So let's get started. Here's your host, Ashlee Ilg.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Big Ideas Podcast. We're so excited to have you here with us for this season. We've just been thoroughly enjoying these conversations with just amazing women and just pursuers of purpose, I guess would be a good way to say it. Just as you know, we've just been sharing stories of how we thought our plans should look, and then bam, God took them, flipped them upside down, did it better than we could have ever imagined. But of course, that doesn't come without some mess and some complications and some just wondering what the heck is going on with a lot of it. And so we're here to bring you another episode just full of just beauty and mess and just seeing God's goodness in all of it. And I'm so excited for our guest to join us today. Her name is Erin Cuccio, and she's out of Dallas, Fort Worth, Dallas kind of area in Texas. You'll have to fix that for me. She's coming to us from the Texas area, and she's also a boy mom, but she's here to talk to us about her story, and she has recently launched her second book. Her first book is Unraveled, and then her second book is a devotional called Live Lovely. I have both of them here with me today, and they are beautiful. You're going to want to order them. We're going to include all the links for finding them. But before we dig into all that, let me just welcome Erin to the show before we get too far ahead of ourselves. So welcome to the show, Erin.
Thank you so much for having me, Ashlee. I do have to say, I can't claim Dallas. I wish I could. They've got so many amazing things to offer. We're actually in Lufkin, Texas, and I love our little small town so much, but not quite as many great amenities here as we would find in Dallas. So excited to be here this morning and can't wait to jump in and chat.
Awesome. Well, I can totally relate with that because everybody thinks, like I say, we live just south of Atlanta, so everybody thinks Atlanta, but we're kind of in the country as well. So
Yes.
if there's a gray cloud or some storms coming, we lose internet, all of that. We have, horses and cows not too far from our property. So, but yeah, and in addition to your books, you also are a podcast host. You are a speaker. Like I mentioned, you are a boy mom, which all the boy moms like. That's just a whole thing.
Yes.
Your husband is also an entrepreneur, so you support him in all of those ventures, which for those of y'all who know me, that's so relatable to my story as well. And we just, as soon as I, connected with you over Instagram, I was like, oh my gosh, we are going to be fast friends. We have a lot.
Yes.
We can talk about probably a lot for a long time.
Yes. I can't wait.
Yes. So, before we jump into some of the major pieces of your books, I always think it's important to share the backstory of kind of where you were, what, kind of prompted you to write your first book, what kind of led you to jump into sharing these messages, these passions of yours. So maybe you can share with us, what set you on course to write Unraveled, and kind of how everything kind of unfolded there.
Yeah, I always wanted to be a writer, not necessarily by career, but that was just something that I always wanted to do.
Mm,
As a little girl, I would write stories. And even in high school, I can remember really enjoying writing. And so my mom would always tell me,
mm,
you're going to write a book one day. And I just never really felt like I had the story. I never really felt like I had something book worthy necessarily really. And probably about 8.5 years ago, my husband and I kind of set off on this journey through grief. We lost our fourth son in early labor. And very shortly
Mm,
after that, just a couple weeks after, I was in worship at church and I felt God just whispered, "This is where your book is going to come from." And I remember leaving that service and thinking to myself, okay, but I still don't get it. I mean, the story was not told, it was just beginning in many
mm,
ways. And I had no idea really that God was beginning to take me on a journey as I went through the grief of losing our son to really find myself and uncover things that had been tangled up inside of me for a really long time. And God used losing him to heal me. And that really is where the book came from. And so, several years after losing our son, Jacob, I just really began to feel this stirring that, okay, now I get it. I see where the story is not done, but how God is starting to weave the broken pieces together into something really beautiful. And that is where I set out to tell the story. I realized that the more I talked about the things that were difficult and troubling and the pain that I had gone through, the more I saw people all around
mm,
connect with that part of my story. And even if they hadn't lost a child necessarily, if they had just walked through some sort of pain, they could see themselves in small chapters of my story. And I knew that God was leading me to tell that part of the story.
yeah, I love that. And, as someone who's putting together my first book too, it's like, well, I don't want to share that part, God,
Mm,
like that's
yeah.
hard. Like it makes me have to think through it all and kind of relive it in a way, And so, how did you find the courage and the strength to know that, your story was yours, but it's also can be used to help so many others? Like, how did you come to grips with all of that? I mean,
I
it's,
really,
yeah, I mean, you say a Sunday morning, he said, this is your story. And you're like, was it just okay? Or, was there
yeah.
some wrestling with that?
Well, I think, I just kind of tucked that away in the back of my mind. And I actually went on a writer's retreat to Southern California with Bob Goff. It absolutely changed the trajectory of the direction that I was going. But I
Mm,
left that retreat feeling empowered to write a book, but still not willing to tell this part of the story.
yeah.
And I really thought, okay, I'm going to start off by writing a devotional. That's easy. It's quick little fun stories that I can just tell. And the more that I began to move in the direction of writing a book, the more I really felt God say, "Nope, that's not it. Remember I told you this
Mm,
is where your book is going to come from." And so I just started piecing together little things that I felt like were connected through the
mm,
story. And I saw God began to really just weave that thread through where I realized things even long before we had lost Jacob were leading me to this moment and stories were connected.
yeah.
And so I can remember Mondays were kind of my writing day, and my husband so graciously would pick the kids up from school and take care of all the things so that I could have a few uninterrupted hours at the coffee shop to just sit and write.
Yeah.
But it also saved me from like completely falling to pieces in the middle of the coffee shop. I wasn't going to be the crazy mushy woman crying in the corner as I was writing things. But I remember leaving the coffee shop and just feeling like I had been through war. I mean, it was
Mm,
like dumping everything out onto the page and living through those parts of the story, not just in my grief, but things that had been covered up for years that God was digging out and untangling knots and really just helping me to see beauty in every single part of the story.
yeah, I love that. And no shade to anybody who's been crying in the coffee shop in the corner.
No way.
Sometimes that's just totally needed. And yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, as you did start to share, those vulnerable pieces of your story, what did you start discovering? Like, how did that kind of change you and your perspective, maybe of what you were sharing? You said the more you shared, the more you realized that people were drawn to that part of your story. So, what kind
Yeah.
of started to change?
Well, I worked with a writing coach as I was working on the book, and I remember submitting a couple of chapters to her, and she would say, "This is really beautiful, but almost too much so. Like, dig deeper. Tell me how you
Mm,
were really feeling. Don't make it pretty. Don't make it polished. Don't make it seem like you had it all together." Because that had been my MO for a really long time. I
yeah.
wanted everything to be polished and put together. And as she really jumped into the trenches with me and pushed me out of my comfort zone to tell the really hard, gritty parts of the story,
Mm,
and then I pieced all of that together, I still got to the end of it all and thought, holy cow, I'm going to release my diary essentially to the world. And that was a really scary thing. But the first time that people got their hands on it and they began reading it, and the text messages and the messages just started flooding in of, oh my goodness, thank you for this part of your story. Oh my goodness,
Mm,
thank you for this particular portion of the story or this really vulnerable moment. It helped me to see this, or it helped me to feel seen in
yeah.
some certain way. That made it all worth it. And it reminded me that, God is just so faithful to
Mm,
use every single broken part for his glory.
yeah. Hey, friend, I wanted to take a quick pause to ask if you've taken the quiz yet to find out what type of dreamer are you. It's super important to discover what's working for you, but also some things that may be keeping you from really pursuing your greatest purpose. It takes just 2 minutes to find out if you're the skimboarder, the sunbather, the sandcastle builder, or the surfer babe. So jump over to dreamerquiz.com and be sure to share your results and tag me in it. Now, back to the show. And I'm wondering if we have the same writing coach. That's been a very similar conversation. I'm like, that is funny. Yeah, I love that. And I think, we've talked about this on a couple previous conversations too, where, and maybe it's like this personality of us where I'll just speak for myself, but I have a feeling you might relate with this, where I really like to put things with a big bow around it and be like,
Mhm.
see, it was messy, but I made it look pretty now. So now you can see it now that I've made it look acceptable,
Yeah.
acceptable,
Yeah.
whatever that means. But that's not what draws people to us. And that's not what draws people to God, because we're allowed to question what he's doing. We're allowed to pursue, like, this is hard. We're allowed to question, like, why do I have to go through this? Like, what is on the other side of it? And it's like literally only in asking those hard questions that we can really get an honest answer from our Heavenly Father of, do you trust me? And it's like,
Right.
well, I can only trust you if I really can't see what it's supposed to look like,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, personally, that's what I wrestle with, of letting the ugly parts be seen, knowing that God is going to use that better than what you might consider okay, or acceptable, like I said.
Right. And I think for me, there were some parts that God had already wrapped up with a pretty bow. And that felt maybe easier to share because I
Mm,
knew that even though I was sharing the messy part at the end, I was going to get to tie it together with a pretty bow.
mm,
And yet there were other parts of the story that he hadn't yet reconciled.
yeah.
He still hasn't yet reconciled. And those are harder to put down on paper,
Mm.
knowing that there's no resolution to this just yet. And still, I believe that God is good.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's so good. Love that. Well, this is kind of going in a different direction, but I have to ask you this. So I saw one of your posts about which may be one of the reasons I was like, we need to be friends.
Oh.
But it was a post where it was like, the younger you, I'm gonna say it wrong, but it was something like your boys were on four-wheelers or tractors, and you were like, the younger me would have thought I was crazy out here, like riding around on land with my boys with, I don't know if you said boots or sneakers or whatever, but you'd always kind of seen yourself wearing, like heels in business meetings and corporate meetings or whatever. And so did how did God kind of change the story in that way, of like what your life looks like now versus maybe what you thought it was supposed to look like profession wise?
Yeah. Growing up, I always thought like I'm going to be some, high power executive with high heels and big coffee and all the things. And I ended up really realizing my heart to be a mother. And I think that for me, this is not everyone's story, but for me personally, I knew that the best way that I could mother my children was to not be pursuing a big, huge career. And that in some ways was hard to navigate and, decipher. I spent the bulk of my career as a teacher. And even through that, I felt ways where God was saying, hey, simmer down. Like you can be a teacher and you can be a good teacher without doing all of the things
Mm,
and just putting all of your energy and effort into that while neglecting home and your
yeah.
kids and your family. And so eventually I got out of teaching and I was just a stay at home mom and did some work from home. And there's a whole big long journey that we don't really have time for today, but God really was working in me to
Mm,
sort of clear my plate for some of the things that he'd always been calling me to do, which was write and speak and
mm,
inspire people in a different way.
yeah.
And through all of that, I just really saw his goodness in leading me down a path that was totally unexpected and yet feels right at home.
Yeah.
We're originally from Louisiana and we moved to Texas several years ago. And now we live out in the middle of the woods with a tractor and four wheeler and a garden and all these things. And there's not too many days, if ever, that I put on high heels. But God has been so good and faithful to give me such peace in these woods and
Yeah.
just show me such a different perspective of how his plan can be so much greater than ours.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned too in Unraveled about how the today's society can really idolize busyness. And if we're not
Mm,
careful, we can get caught up in that and think that our identity or our worth or our value is tied to what we produce.
yeah.
And it's never satisfied. There's always, well, you did that today or yesterday. So what are you going to do today? And so
Yep.
how do you, for our listeners who are, high achievers or the go-getter, or just I don't want to say just, but the moms who are also pursuing, passion projects and other things. And there's this belief that, you're never doing enough, and so how do we tackle that mindset of busyness does not equal your worth?
Yeah.
What would you say to all of that?
Well, first of all, I am a people pleaser in recovery, and I think that that will always be the case. I just have such a difficult time letting people down. I have such a difficult time saying no. And while God has really been doing a work on me the last several years and learning to get better at that, I think that is something that I'm always like talking myself back off the ledge.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that much. You don't have to stay so busy. And I certainly go through seasons where I'm just running hard and pushing hard. And then what I've learned is that those are okay. I think God
Mm.
honors a woman's heart that wants to work. I mean, Proverbs 31
Yeah.
talks about that, about how a woman is fruitful in her labor and she sets her hands to do good work. And so I think that that is honoring to the Lord.
Mm.
But God really has spoken to me in the last couple of years about Sabbath and the importance of pausing to rest. And if you look at the original meaning of the word Sabbath, it really means to stop or to cease striving. And when I learned that, I thought, gosh, that is so empowering to me because I am a striver by nature. I want people to see the excellent work that I'm doing and I want to
Mm.
feel like I'm providing value for people. But there are seasons that God calls us to just pause and he calls us to rest and to remember that we don't spin all the plates. We don't keep everything
Yeah.
moving. It's really him that does it. And I think that Sabbath is really about posturing our hearts and posturing our perspective to remember that we are not the circus master here. God is the one who is in charge and he is in authority. And so things are going to be okay if we take a moment to pause. Things are going to keep spinning if we have a day of rest. God
Mm.
is going to honor that. And it's really in our pause that he brings us about to greater productivity.
Yeah. Yeah. And for the, person listening who's like, but my calendar is full, you don't understand what I have that I can't say no to, like humans, keeping humans alive or, doing things that create income to support my family, and I guess that's maybe the difference. I'm just kind of thinking out loud, the difference between Sabbath versus maybe just stewarding what we have,
Yeah.
I feel like there's always the tension there.
Absolutely. And I would say, and this might ruffle feathers just a little bit, but I would challenge that perspective because I absolutely understand that I think we all have different levels of busy.
Mm.
Your busy as a mom of five is going to be different from my busy as a mom of three, is going to be different from the next mom who maybe has one kid or a full time job or the woman who has no kids. There's so many
Yeah.
different perspectives of the way that we have to fill our time. But I would challenge and encourage you to look at what is filling your plate. And
Mm.
certainly there are those things that you can't say no to. They are what I
Mm.
would like to call a necessary yes. But when we really stop to evaluate how much of your schedule is filled with things that maybe we have caused ourselves to believe are necessary yeses, but in fact they are not. And so I try really hard to evaluate the things that I'm putting onto my calendar and discover if they are a necessary yes.
Mhm.
And the way that I try to filter that is looking at, is this producing good fruit in my life, in my family's life? There are going to be some things that don't necessarily bring us joy. I don't like to fold socks or cook dinner all the time, but those are necessary yeses. My family
Right.
has to eat, and, clean laundry produces order in our home. And so I think there was a big mantra in recent years that was like, if it's not a heck yes, then it should be a no. I don't agree with that. I think there are things that we just have to say yes to
Yeah.
that are necessary yeses.
Right.
But when we look at our calendar, I think it's really easy to start to think, well, everything is a necessary yes, when in fact it might not be. And there are some small things that we could cut out here or there to make more
Mhm.
room for margin in our lives.
Yeah. And sometimes it takes somebody else looking at your calendar to say, I don't
Right.
know. I don't know that that's, like you said, producing fruit. That's a good
Yeah.
fruit checker. That's a
Yeah.
good gauge. Yeah, I love that.
And even if it is producing fruit, it still may not be a necessary yes.
Yeah.
If you're really struggling to hold all the things and,
Hmm.
keep your calendar in check, where can you pull back just a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. One of my like a business mentor said one time, and this has always stayed with me. She said you can do anything you want in life. So the dreamer in me was like, I can do anything, and she's like, you just can't do everything right now.
Yep.
And so that's just kind of like anchored me in. It's just not the right season. Like if it's
Yep.
not the right season, it's okay. It doesn't mean you can't do it later. And that just it
Absolutely.
gives me so much peace.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I'm like, I want to do everything. And then 2 days later, I'm like, I said yes to too many things.
Yes.
So all right. So let's talk about your new devotional, Live Lovely. And I apologize. We're kind of jumping all over the place here.
That's all
There's
right.
so much I wanted to talk to you about. But it's, a devotional, make room for peace and pursue a life of purpose. And I love how it's, so you got to finally do your devotional, but there is
Yes.
nothing like quick and easy about about this. But tell us what led to, like, now's the time. I know there's a little bit of a backstory with this one. So what led to Live Lovely?
Well, my podcast is called Room for Lovely, and that has just become kind of a mantra for me personally. I live in a house with a bunch of wild, stinky boys. And so I'm a very girly girl. Anytime that I would do anything remotely girly, I would make the joke that I was making room for lovely. If I put
Mm,
flowers on the table or, set a really nice dinner or anything like that, the joke was, oh, mom's just making room for lovely.
I love that.
And then it became this deeper meaning of, in every season of our life, we can make room for lovely on the cloudy days, on the difficult days, on the really hard seasons. We can find lovely if we're looking for it. And as I walked through that and navigated that for the last several years through my podcast, it really became this way of life where I was always pursuing, how can I live lovely? How can I produce that in other people's lives? How can I inject that into every day, my own life, other people's lives around me? And the devotional really is a call for me more than anything to keep making room to live lovely. There are 100 devotionals in this book, and I specifically did not want it to be laid out as day one, day two, day three,
Mm,
because I didn't want anyone to feel the pressure of, I've got to make it through. I've got to do this every day. I've got to read all of these
yeah.
devotions. I really wanted to create a book that people could pick up on the days where they just needed a pocket of peace to remind themselves, hey, today I need to just slow down. I want to remind myself what it means to pursue purpose. And I want to drown out the crazy. I want to get off the hamster wheel. And I just want to anchor myself in the truth of God's word and what he says about me and what he's calling me to do. And so the book for me was really a project of, I did not sit on this very long. I had wanted to do a devotional for a really long time.
Mm,
But when it finally struck me and I thought, okay, I'm going to do it, I really put the whole thing together in just a couple of months from start to finish. And that was wild to me that
yeah.
I like pushed through it so quickly. But I was talking with my best friend who designed the cover. She designed the cover on my previous book as well. And all the doubt and all the fear and all the things started creeping up. And she just quickly said, nope, stop that. If it's for one person, it matters.
Yeah.
And immediately I just felt that resonate with me. And I said, you know what? If this book was just for me, that's okay. Because I think it was the first thing that I had the idea and I just stepped out in bold obedience, and I didn't sit on it and wonder about it and,
Yeah.
twiddle my thumbs and think, "Oh God, maybe I'm not supposed to do this," or "How should I best do this?" And I just did it. I just said, "Okay, God, I'm going to do it." And I think that for me was really rewarding to just see God move in that way and open doors for me in this book that I couldn't have dreamed, but I just stepped out. And I think that
Mhm.
I know so many people wrestle with that so many times when God
Mhm.
calls them to do something and they might sit on it for a really long time. Sometimes we just have to step out and then watch his favor come through.
Yeah, yeah. Well, when I was thinking about, I haven't gone through the entire book yet, but in thinking like, well, what do you want your readers to walk away with when they read this book, knowing that backstory, and I'd already read a little bit about that, that you had posted and shared, and I was like, the biggest thing I am already getting out of that devotional is your obedience. More
Mm.
than, I mean, the content is amazing. It's so rich and so deep. And I love journaling. I love deep journaling, but so it's a perfect piece for that. But I love your obedience with it. And I think for anybody listening who, like what you just said, I think knowing that you heard God say, do this, do it now, and you did it, and now you're holding it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that it gets any better than that.
Yeah. I just was having this conversation over the weekend. We had a local bookstore open up in our town, and
Mm,
they invited me to be part of their grand opening and do a book signing there
love
because it
that.
was so close to the launch. And I was so honored to be a part and loved getting to meet new faces and, have the book there and all of that. But I got home and I was sitting in my office and my boys came, dwindling in little by little. And we were all sitting around on the floor and I was going through the leftover supplies. And all at once, I just said out loud, "Guys, I'm really proud of this book." And they were like, "Mom, you should be." And they just started encouraging me. And it was such a blessing for
Mm,
me to hear their perspective because I think so often as a mom and as someone who is trying to pursue purpose, I get so caught up in, okay, God, what's next? Okay, what big dream do I have? What am I going to go after next? That I forget to see the things that I have accomplished or the things that He has been faithful to produce in me. And so I think sometimes to just pause and look back at, hey, you really have accomplished some things. You have been faithful to what He's asked you to do, reminds you that you can move forward and keep pursuing the purpose that He's called you to and keep being obedient with the next thing and the next thing.
Yeah, well, and especially knowing that you've got little eyes watching you too. I mean, they saw all of that unfold. They watched your obedience. I don't know at what level they were involved with it, even if it was just creating some margin in your home with helping out with things so that you didn't have to taking things off your
Right.
plate, so to speak. That's sometimes just as valuable as doing something. But as a mom, of course, with older kids that are watching me, I'm constantly like, oh, God, are they getting the good parts of this? Are they
Mm,
am I doing this well for them as an example?
yeah.
I mean, obviously you felt that in that conversation and moment with them as well, too.
I think that's always so important because I am thinking of that often. I'm wondering, okay, are they seeing the stressful, hard, difficult side of this, which I think is important too.
Yeah.
Following God and being obedient is not going to be easy. It's not going to be always beautiful, but I also want them to see the honoring heart, the
Hmm.
obedient heart, the humble heart that goes
Yeah.
forward in these projects to know that this isn't just mom, with white knuckles getting through this, but it's God's faithfulness and it's following His lead and it's listening to things that He has to say about what direction He wants me to go. And I hope that I'm providing a mix of both of those
Yeah.
things for them.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I'm sure you are. Yeah. I always want to like pull them aside and be like, "So what did you learn today? Tell me all the good things."
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so I mean it kind of leads into my question too. So as somebody, like I said at the very beginning, I really resonate and relate with a lot of your life story, and the picture of what your day in the day, kind of looks like right now. And I'm just curious, and I'm sure there's listeners out there that would love to know this too, but what fuels you, to in the midst of raising a family, supporting a husband, following those big dreams, what fuels you to do those on a daily basis? And what keeps you going on the days where you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I have it I don't know if do you think that ever, like I don't know if I can do all of this, or maybe I need to, pause more.
I
So
think for
yeah.
me, I have had to really walk an interesting line because I don't like to do anything unless it's excellent.
Mm,
And for a really long time, I was a lot of people's right hand woman and doing things with excellence for everyone else. And then one day I woke up and I felt like God was calling me to a season of being excellent for the calling that He had given me. And yet, that still doesn't negate the fact that I am still my husband's right hand woman and I still have these children to raise and I still have these other responsibilities that I have to take care of. And so sometimes it can be difficult because I think, okay, that's great, but my purpose sometimes still ends up on the back burner. And so am I doing it with excellence? Am I, following what you've asked me to do, God? And there was a particular season where I really, really liked what you said earlier, where you said, this may not be the season, and that's okay. And I think that, I am not in a season where I'm jet setting across the country multiple times a month, getting to speak. I would love that. That would be amazing. And yet I would be miserable if that was my life right
yeah.
now because I want to be home with my boys and I want to be this anchor of peace for my family. And so I've really had to adjust and alter my perspective of what walking my purpose out looks like.
Yeah.
And I just recently did a podcast interview where my guest was talking about how they have done some really magnificent things for the Lord, things that many of us would only dream of. And in this season of their life, they're a mom at home, and it feels sometimes a little bit mundane, but we are just as honoring to the Lord when we walk in the magnificent and when we walk in the mundane. And I think that
Mm,
me being able to really keep that perspective and say, okay, God, if today is a magnificent day, I want to serve you well. And if today is a mundane day, I still want to serve you really, really well. And so whatever I'm doing, the Bible says, whatever you do
yeah.
in word or deed, do it as unto the Lord. If I'm in a corporate office coaching a group of, executives and helping them with team building, I want to do that well.
Yeah.
And if I'm flipping pancakes and folding socks, I want to do that well too. And so really just adjusting that perspective, I think has been the thing that has fueled me and kept me going.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And I think knowing that, for me, knowing that, today I have this on my calendar, and I've shared this before too, where the night before, maybe I thought that my day the next day was going to look like this, but I still wake up that morning and go, okay, God, it's all on your altar. What do you have for me to focus on today? If I need to put everything I thought I was supposed to do aside, which is really hard for me to do, but I have learned through many times that whatever the priority needs to be that day, because I mean, I know you can relate with this. You've got kids. You have a husband who is my husband is like, oh, my day is going to look like this. I had no idea, and the nature of our work is, he has to fly by the seat of his pants a lot, which means as his right hand woman, I love how you said that. Also need to be flexible to handle those
I'm not good at
things.
that.
Yeah, I'm not good at it. I'm really not. I cannot wrap that up in a pretty bow.
Yes.
I do not like, I just said this the other day. I'm like, I do not like when my cheese gets moved. I still do not like that.
Yep.
But knowing and just having those quiet whispered prayers, I've gotten really good at them. God, help me right now. Like, help me answer this conversation. Help me respond with grace. Help me respond with patience, and flexibility. And because I really wanted to do this today, and I planned a lot of things to make this happen, but I need to put it aside right now. And I mean, it's hard.
Yeah. I think I love that those quiet whispered prayers. I think
Mm,
about for so long, I grew up with the idea that we had to set aside time to be quiet with the Lord. And I certainly think that that is so important. And I also think that, especially in motherhood, God calls us to just a constant communion with Him.
mm,
And, I think about in a more practical example, in my day to day life, all through the day, my husband may be at work, I may be doing my thing, but we're texting all through the day about different things. It's very rare that we're able to sit down and have a 2 hour conversation.
mhm.
We've got a wild life. And so it's those constant texts through
Yeah.
the day that keep us going. And I think of the same with the Lord. Like, I may not have 2 hours, Lord, to set aside in quiet peace with you, but I don't know that God is really asking us to do that. I think He's okay with those constant quiet prayers that are just getting us through moment by moment. I think of the
Mhm.
old hymn, Every Hour I Need Thee,
Yeah.
and I'm like, every minute, Lord, I need you every minute. Like, show up and be here with me every single minute. And I think that He's so faithful to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's so awesome when when I slow down and I'm like, oh, you are here right now. And it's
Yeah.
not like I'm whispering into some empty void. I'm like, you literally arranged that, even as silly as some things might be, but I'm like, that gave me peace. That gave me 5 extra minutes. That gave me one more, a breath of patience for a conversation that could have gone a different way with one of my children.
Mhm.
Or, they slept for 5 minutes longer for their nap so that I could finish one more thing that really made a big difference, just,
Right.
and I'm like, oh, he is so close. He's always so near. And I don't really know how I got on this tangent, but you were talking about what fuels you. And I think to full circle that, I mean, just being near, I mean, like
Mhm.
you've said, and knowing that even if you're not doing what maybe you thought you were going to be doing that day, it's still energizing or grace filling. I can't think of
Yeah.
a good word of, well, God is still here and God is helping me with this today. And so we'll
Right.
tackle tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to your word lovely because it needs its own segment. It's such a sweet but powerful word, and it's not used very often.
Mm.
I don't feel like it's an overused word at all, but it carries so much weight to it. And I love that that's like your word.
Yeah.
And so talk to the listener who is really looking to find lovely right now in their struggle or maybe a hard season that they thought this was not supposed to be this way. What would you say for them and to help them find that lovely?
Yeah. One of the first scriptures that I can remember memorizing as a little girl in Sunday school or Wednesday night church, whichever it was Philippians 4:8 that tells us that whatsoever things are good, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are noble, whatsoever things are lovely. And it goes on to list all of these things. Think on these things. Think on these things.
Mm.
And I know that I personally am guilty. And I think, especially in the world that we live in today, where we are just bombarded with everything but what is good and true
Yeah.
and lovely, like we are so, our brains are so trained to see the opposite of all of those things. But God says, no, think on those things, think on the good things, the lovely things.
Yeah.
I think that it's so important for us to really learn to be noticers of those things in our lives. And often I'll do this exercise if I'm speaking somewhere where I'll say, okay, tell me something that you're grateful for. And 9 times out of 10, we hear, I'm grateful for my home. I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for my job, right? The trite things that certainly we are grateful for those things, but they're just almost so routine. It's so monotonous. And I encourage people to think about the unexpected things. I was driving to work this morning and there was the most beautiful sunrise.
Mm.
I was sitting at my office and there was a hummingbird outside the window. My son was outside playing and brought in a flower for me. Those little things that so often we're tempted to overlook
Mm.
that make all the difference in shifting our perspective. And I think that when we can learn to not allow ourselves to be bombarded by all the negative things that are surrounding us all the time, and instead train our minds to think on whatever is good, whatever is noble, whatever is praiseworthy, whatever is true, whatever is lovely, then it can really, really shift our perspective and our attitudes in our lives.
Yeah, it's so good. I mean, and it's not like this, well, let's just find the silver lining,
No.
let's just brush it off or ignore that it's hard. But like you said, it's just go deeper, a big piece of my book is about and a big piece of the theme of this season on this podcast is about, well, I thought it was going to go this way, it turned out pretty crazy, some things harder, some things just, I'll even say I didn't have them on my vision board. They're not
Mhm.
bad things, they're just I didn't have space for them they weren't on my 10-year plan. And
Yeah.
so it's my cheese got moved.
Yes.
And that's hard, that can
Yeah.
be hard. And I'm certainly not putting that up against, a traumatic or more serious, kind of situation, but it does take that extra layer of, pursuing God and pursuing like, well, what do you have for me even still, like as you were grieving the loss of your son, how did you find the lovely in those situations, and in the days that followed, I mean, you had 3 elders that kind of walked that journey with you too,
I tell a story in the book,
yeah.
and I really go back to this so often that just, I guess it was several weeks after we had lost our son. It was New Year's Eve, and we were invited out to dinner and just go have a good time with some friends. And I remember being so angry about going there. I don't want to go. I don't want to do this. I don't want to laugh. I don't want to have fun. And it really felt like a betrayal of my grief, a
Mm,
betrayal to my son. And I ended up going, and I just remember like plastering a smile on my face. And if I can just get through this dinner, if I can just get through this dinner. And at the end of the dinner, we had friends with us that said, let's go dancing. And I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. Like, I don't want to do this. And we ended up going, and I found myself in the middle of the dance floor dancing to Whitney Houston's I Want to Dance with Somebody and laughing and feeling like I was betraying my son even in that moment. And I just felt the gentle reminder that God has given us two hands, and we can hold both grief and both
mm,
joy. We can hold both anger and find peace. We can do both of those things, and it's not betraying either emotion to feel both of them. And I just go back to that so often in my
yeah.
life. God, you've given me two hands. You've given me two hands. And so I can feel this emotion, and that's okay. And I can feel this emotion, and that's okay too.
Mm,
And I think that that has been really important in my journey to know give yourself space for grief, give yourself space for anger, give yourself space to feel betrayed, and also keep moving,
yeah.
also keep going, also look for the light in the situation where you can learn to heal piece by piece.
That's so good. Yeah. I didn't really know what I was trying to ask there, but everything you just said was amazing and beautiful.
Thank you.
And yes, I mean, and like you said, even people who have not experienced the same type of grief as you, I have not lost a child, but I can still understand and still feel that. I mean, I'm getting emotional just thinking about it, but just, yes, that tension of holding the really hard parts in one hand, but still not clenching your fist in the other, but giving God room to fill it with good
Yeah.
and being okay, being brave enough to hold them both. I mean,
Right.
yeah. Oh, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Well, I know everybody's going to want to know where to follow you and where to find you. So first things first, tell them where to find your books, and then your social media page is your Instagram is amazingly encouraging, amazingly relatable. I love your content. So tell everybody where to find you, where to follow you, and where to find all your books.
Yeah, so I'm most active on Instagram, and it's just at Erin Cuccio on Instagram. Love to hang out there, love to connect with people. So if you follow there, please tell me hello. I would love to know where you came from and just get to connect with you on a deeper level. And then the books are available anywhere books are sold. Specifically, you can find them on my website. If you get them directly from me, I would love to just sign it and send it out to you with some encouragement. And then my website as well, erincuccio.com.
Love that. Yes, and your podcast, Room for Lovely, is on all streaming
Yes.
platforms as well. Yeah,
Yes.
love that. Well, Erin, thank you so much for being here. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I've loved getting to know you, and I appreciate your honest, transparent, vulnerable heart. I love the way you walk through your story, and you just make room for everybody to find their lovely too. So, thank you so much for
Thank
being
you.
here.
Thanks for having me. It's always a joy to get to connect, but you are just so special. And I think that you're so right. We could be fast friends and have things to talk about for days. So I'm excited
Yeah.
to get to connect with you here.
Yes, awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us here. As always, keep your big ideas coming, and we will see you on the next episode. Hey, friends, thanks so much for tuning in today. Before you go, it would mean the world to me and my family if you would share this episode with at least one person who you think might benefit from this message. And of course, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. You can also follow me at Ashlee Ilg on Instagram to keep up with our adventures and for continued encouragement as you pursue your big ideas. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time.